What's happening, everybody? So this is part 2 of that sway bar install, the Scat Pack front sway bar that I installed on my Challenger Hellcat. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, it's basically me showing you guys the differences in weight between a Scat Pack sway bar, which is 32 millimeters in hollow, versus a Hellcat Challenger sway bar, which is 34 millimeters in diameter and is solid steel. It's quite a bit of difference, about 11 pounds. And that is right on the front of the car. I happen to be replacing front sway bar bushings anyway, so I figured, while I'm here, I might as well swap out the bars. But along the way, from driving impressions so far, I can tell you that I picked up a couple of benefits that are above and beyond just shedding about 10 or 11 pounds from the front of my car. For those of you that don't know, I used to have a 2016 SRT 392. In essence, it is the Grand Sport to Chevrolet's Corvette Z06. In essence, a naturally aspirated version of the highest performance model in terms of braking and suspension and things of that nature. It's billed as having, in essence, the same suspension as the Hellcat, but in this experiment that I've been putting together, I've found that the front sway bar is actually not the same. The SRT 392 uses the same front sway bar as the Scat Pack. But what that allows you to do is have real adjustable driving modes for the suspension. The Hellcat has 3 different adjustments: street, sport, and track, and so does the SRT. It follows suit because it has, again, the same suspension. But it has different sway bars. And because it has softer sway bars, the SRT 392 has a distinct difference between the 3 modes, with street being nice and soft, sport being basically in the middle, kind of a sporty feel, and with track being a very hunkered down feeling. With the Hellcat having that extremely rigid front sway bar, you're kind of limited to only one drive mode realistically, in that street. Sport mode feels like track mode in the SRT 392, and track would basically beat you half to death. So in installing the same front sway bar that I had in my SRT 392, it now basically feels like my SRT 392 when you adjust the suspension setting. So it's kind of like I got my SRT back. Street feels a little bit more compliant. Sport feels a little bit more, like a Scat Pack would feel, and then track is nowhere near as harsh as it was before. So that's a neat added benefit to running that sway bar in the car, although I was a little bit, I don't know if you could call it miffed, I guess, that my SRT 392, which again was sold as having the same suspension as a Hellcat, really didn't. In essence, I got that car back, so to speak, by having that same front sway bar. One other thing though, in running the car on the street at, let's just call them high load 6th gear conditions, I can tell you this: the car feels a bit more balanced at high speeds under high loads. With the very stiff front sway bar, the car felt a little bit quick to react with steering wheel inputs, and when you're going really fast and you're on a drag pack setup, you don't necessarily want it to be as darty. With the Scat Pack front sway bar at higher speeds, and keep in mind where I do my data logging is a little bit of a bend to the right and to the left. It basically just kind of arcs over and then comes back over a bridge. The car actually felt more balanced, and it wasn't as twitchy at high speeds, which I found to be pretty interesting. And I backed that up not once but twice, and I did that in street mode. So if you can imagine doing that in street mode in the softest setting and the car feeling even more balanced, you can imagine when I was driving it around in sport mode, the car felt very neutral, which is something that I found that I really liked. The car is a street car, and it is drag race centric. I don't know of a whole lot of people taking their Hellcats on road courses. I'm sure if you are, you'll comment and tell me all about your experience and how wonderful it is. But the idea is that for a street car, you want a suspension that is maybe a little bit more street compliant. And perhaps a little bit more appropriate for what you're doing with the car in general. And for me, having more distinct driving modes, again, street, sport, and track, progressively being firmer and again, more hunkered down feeling, as opposed to only having one mode in the street mode, and then the rest of the modes, sport and track, just really being jarry. That's no fun. So that's the other benefit that I got out of this bar. Again, it felt more neutral and more balanced at those higher speeds, even in slight bends at the elevated speeds, than it did before with that very rigid front solid sway bar. And so if you are thinking about doing this swap, I can tell you that the 223 bar, which is what it's basically kind of known as, is kind of a catch-all bar, and it seems like only the Hellcat Challengers have those solid sway bars. That 223 bar can also be found in Charger Hellcats, as well as pretty much anything that's not a Hellcat in the lineup. So pretty easy to find bushings for as well. So there's your driving impressions of swapping that softer front sway bar into the car. I figured it wouldn't be much of a difference. I wasn't even thinking about the drive modes when I put this whole experiment together. I figured I was just going to lose some weight and basically get the benefits of having a 1320 or a Demon front sway bar in terms of weight savings, that 10 or 11 pounds that you get. But in this case, it was just going to be something easy to get my hands on. Well, come to find out, I kind of got my SRT 392 back in a way with the adjustability and the actual usable adjustments in the suspension, as well as having a car that seems to be a little bit more balanced at any speed. Now, I will say this, I am leaving the Hellcat solid rear sway bar in place, primarily because my car does spend quite a bit of time at the drag strip and it's independent rear suspension. So I'd like to try to keep those rear tires as planted as I can. I don't want it, leaning over, tilting over and actually loading one side overly, in other words, more than the other. But for the front, I'm liking this thing, and I can tell you this, the fact that the car feels more balanced is one of the things that makes this really one of my favorite mods that I've done to the car at this point. I'm going to be putting the street setup back on the car, and I'll hit some twisties and some off ramps with the car, but I don't think there's going to be any difference in terms of how confident I am with it. Instead of being in street mode, I'll just be in sport mode. And that'll be familiar territory because, again, the car is acting extremely similar, if not identical, to how my SRT 392 handled and how it responded in those situations. So there you have it. Those are my driving impressions. Post up your comments. Let me know what you think. And with that, that is a wrap. Adios.